Hi, I'm Blake Baxter, and we're in my studio in Joshua Tree. Welcome. Behind me is a piece that I'm just wrapping up right now. Hasn't been titled yet, but for me, it's a bit of a reference piece relative to a lot of different things that I've been working on in a series called Iteration, of which the piece that's in the auction is a part. My work is done in sand and acrylic polymer and spray paint. And with my work, which I think, as you can see, is very reductive, I'm working with light and space, working with light in a room so that the piece itself creates focus around the way light changes in a space. And not only the way light changes in a space, but the way light changes over time. So there's a temporality involved as well. This piece, for example, is rendered in one color black. The entire piece all the way across is done with one color of black. It's not mixed. The changes and the variation that you're seeing are all a result of the surface the paint is applied to. The very dark bands here is a black wash over sand. And I use a specific sand in all of these pieces in this series. These bands here, which are a little lighter or appear a little lighter, are the raw paint directly over the sand, as opposed to a wash soaking into the sand. And these reflective areas, or these lighter areas that seem almost gray, blue-gray in the middle here, are the exact same paint on canvas. So it's reflecting a lot more than the paint in the areas that have sand on them, primarily because the sand is capturing light, it's refracting it in different directions, and the light's getting lost in the surface, whereas the paint on the canvas is really reflecting light in a different way. And what I'm trying to do here is draw my eye to the changes in light in the room. You can see that at the bottom, for instance, in the middle here, it's not reflecting much. It's a matte, and the sand areas seem lighter than the reflective areas until you get up to about here. You've got a very blue light reflecting through in these black zips, I'll call them, which is a term that Barnett Newman coined. At the top, you'll start to see an almost orange color reflecting in these bands, which is coming off of the ceiling of the studio and the lights that we have on right now. So you're seeing almost a reflection of the space that you're in. At the same time, it's drawing your attention to the way the light is changing. The longer you look at the work, the more variation you'll notice, so that the work takes on different effect over time. And as light changes throughout the day and transitions into night and the use of artificial light, the work changes dramatically as well. So another characteristic of the work in this series is the way the work interacts with the room, but also the way it interacts with the wall that it's on. With this piece, with all the pieces, the distance between the pieces is relative to the distance used, a measurement used on the face of the piece. So in this case, the distance between the pieces is approximately the same as these reflective bands moving up and down. And what that does is it kind of annexes the space. It creates a connection between the work and the room that it's in. My work is very reductive, and in that way, I think it has to do two things. It needs to be able to exist in a space where it might not be getting a lot of attention, where someone might come through, glance at it momentarily, recognize it as an element in a space, and at the same time needs to be able to stand up to a more rigorous act of seeing, I'll say, where you might be looking at a piece for a period of time greater than several minutes, and then it starts to take on different character entirely. And I try to draw the viewer into the piece and then out into the room and then back into the piece. And part of doing that is creating spaces with the space between the piece that interacts with the piece as a whole. This is iteration number 41. This is the work that's in the Palm Springs Art Museum auction. You can see in this piece I'm working with the reflectivity and refraction caused by the material and the color as I am in the other piece. In this piece I'm also working with translucency and the translucency of the material. Again, this piece is made with sand and spray paint and acrylic polymer. The areas of variation that go from different types of grays, off-whites into gray, these are black and white paintings underneath several coats of sand. So if you look at the middle section and you imagine a black field with two white bands going down on either side, here and here. So it's black, white, black, white, black. The center is masked, and then sand is applied over the surface. I apply the sand one layer at a time. I allow it to completely dry. It's then brushed off. I look at it. I decide if the surface is approaching something that's visually interesting. If not, I apply another layer of sand. I generally work to about 3 or 4 layers of sand over the surface of the paint. And then I get into these other colors that start to interplay with the shadow in between the panels as well. And you can see some of that working right here with a shadow in between, kind of interplaying here. As you're looking face on to the piece, you see the space in between the sections and how they interact dimensionally with the composition of the work itself. As you move off to the side of the piece, as you're walking past it, you'll get to the point where the wall disappears and you're looking across a single surface and the dynamic of the piece changes. So it changes with the person in the room as the viewer moves. It changes over time. With all the pieces in this series, masking is an important part of the process. And I use a combination of masking tape and masking paper depending on what I'm doing. The masking is fairly precise, as with most of what I do. This is a piece that I'm preparing for another coat of black paint, but I want that black paint to be of a different texture and depth than the black paint that's already on here. So I'm going to use the same paint, but masking certain areas, I'm going to add additional layers of that paint to specific parts of the surface. This piece is a little further along in its development. It has a layer of sand on it plus a masked area. What will happen with this piece next is I'll start applying black washes to the surface. But what I want to show you is how the sand is applied to a piece like this. The sand is a very specific type of sand. It's a very refined sand that is silica dust free. It's actually used as a therapy sand for children because it's safer than most sand. And I find it to be very, very consistent for that purpose. So it's a very fine, light colored sand. And I'll just apply it onto a surface in an even way through a sift can. This surface will have polymer on it or some other type of adhesive material. In the case of the iteration series, it's all acrylic polymer. And then I'll allow that to completely dry before then removing the sand from the surface, reevaluating it, and then possibly adding another layer of sand. Once I've reached a point where I feel the sand surface itself is sufficient thickness and density and coverage in a way that I like, then I'll start to fix that sand surface either with a black wash or a clear wash in some way that finalizes the piece.